this is from an end user perspective, what it would look like. And again, I've already shown you how you can look at the content, take a look at the scripts, take a look at the data templates. Data templates are typically where the consumers of these scripts and templates would come and find one that would be meaningful for them to use. Again, if they've downloaded a copy a while ago, it's going to make sure that they download the latest and greatest, so there's version controls. So this becomes the equivalent of a shared drive, if you will, of SAP interactions that they can leverage. So that's from the user perspective. And then I'm going to hop over here to let me see, a browser where I've got additional controls. So we'll be able to take a look at users and take a look at what's been assigned to them and their permissions. So I can search for a user or part of a username, and I happen to have 2 different users. So the one that I'm logged in right now has full control. It can develop scripts and review them. It can review files. It can run scripts. I can set different settings, which we'll take a look at in a little while. I can take a look at users. I can look at reports. So I have basically just about every permission there is within our user governance platform. The one you saw me previously in the other browser, I can review scripts and I can run scripts, but I can't go through and change any of the settings. I can't look at users. I can't look at licenses. So that's part of the way that we segregate those roles, back to what Ryan said earlier, in addition to some other roles that are here as part of user governance. So again, you've got users, you've got license and licensing types. So again, the license types would differentiate between developers and runners. You can take a look at licenses that have been assigned. So that's one other way that you can see who has actually been assigned to using the product. You'll see we have quite a number of licenses, and not all of them have been assigned yet. So here's the ones that they're assigned to. And then there's a large number of settings, most of which the end users don't have access to, and I'll just go through some of them. So in one of the cases here, under preferences, we have settings for transaction, and this is where the review process, you could set it so that there's always a review process for both the file and or the script. And there's settings in here on what to do in case users encounter errors. There's options here for query itself. And then we have options for foundation. And again, most people are not going to be able to change these settings, although I can. And this is the option where you would basically uncheck that and save that setting, so that if I submit the script, I can't choose myself to approve it. I'm going to have to choose somebody in a group that is part of the approver list, and it has to be somebody else. But again, for demonstration purposes, we've enabled all of this. So again, there's a number of options that you have in order to control what the users, both the designers and the runners. And then we have policies. So policies are going to be, again, layered on top of what you have assigned to you as far as permissions, as far as licenses, and SAP security. All of that's always enforced, but this is a layer on top of that. So for example, let's take a look at one of these policies. So we have an example one here. So SAP systems are designated as production or non-production, or you can specify one specifically. So this is for production systems, and you give it a name. And it basically, this one says, disallow any transaction that begins with an F on these days of the month, for all months, because this is when you're doing month-end close, as an example. Or maybe you allow it, but you only want them to be able to post no more than 50 documents at a time. And this is, again, monthly. You could also specify things weekly, and weekly you could often limit how many can be processed during core business hours. And then you can also choose standard. That means all the time. And when you set up these policies, you basically then assign users or groups of users to these policies so that they're enforced. So before I can actually run that MMO2 that I showed you, it's going to check to make sure there's a policy in place that either allows me to do it or doesn't allow me to do it. So there's one example. Another example might be here with query. And we've had people say, Sigrid, you know, we'd really love to give people access to query, but it gives them access to a set of tables, for example, maybe HR data. Well, they don't want them to be able to see the one that has salary. So again, it's going to leverage all the SAP security and objects and profiles that you have in place, but then you can say, hey, guess what? I'm going to disallow that they have access to this table, and I think this is the right one. I might have had a typo. You can say, except for this table, or you could use a comma separated. You might just say, hey, anything that begins with HRP. So again, this takes a little bit of knowledge of the SAP table names, but gives you additional security that you can layer on top of whatever security you have with SAP, as well as the permissions that your specific license type will give you. So hopefully that gives you a few ideas on additional controls. And then I've often heard, Sigrid, you know, I'm an IT, I might be a basis person. What are people doing with Winshuttle on my SAP system? So one of the things that we have available for you, and I'll just choose a date range here, is to look at the usage reports. And the usage reports basically list the user, the SAP username, the system, when, how much time they spent, what T code, and whether this is a web service or because these SAP interactions can be leveraged as a web service as well, or if they were a manual run or what we call an auto run, so you can schedule these to run automatically after they've been approved if you need data approval, or as you saw me do, a manual run. So if I click to view details, it's actually going to show you the transaction script that they used. It will again tell you the T code. It tells you how long it took if you did it manually. It shows you how long it took to load. If you had any errors, if you see a trend with a lot of errors, you could potentially modify the template or give the user some training. So we have these for both transaction and query. And then we have reports that basically will show you, which T codes are being used, any kind of savings related to using it, and then you can swap over to users and see which users have been busy, and you can see I've been pretty busy. This one as well. It will, again, just showing you the number of records processed. So there's nowhere to hide. In addition to all of the SAP change logs that will still be maintained if you use a Winshuttle script, we have a number of ways to track what people are using, what kind of licensing they're using, and what they're doing and when, just so that you can keep track of what's going on with the Winshuttle user usage. So it's just a small taste of what we have available in user governance. Hopefully that gives you an idea that if you have a reasonable sized user audience and you want to layer on additional controls, this is something available